Aging is inevitably what all of us face. Currently, 16% of the UK population is made up of over 65-year-olds, and this percentage will continue to grow. This is due to factors such as improved medical care, well-being, and personal health, which allows people to live longer. Current estimates suggest that by 2030, the number of elderly people will increase to 20% of the population. Specifically in Devon, pensioners make up 21% of the population, meaning that Devon has a higher elderly population than the national average. This means that the needs for pensioners must be accommodated, as they do face many problems. For example, due to the rural structure of Devon, many pensioners suffer from isolation. Around 25% of the aged are a 40-minute bus ride from their nearest market town. Also, a lot of the elderly are susceptible to falls, which costs the NHS £2,000 per occurrence. In order for the elderly to be properly represented, local parties and politicians need to ensure that they are taking this age group into account when creating policies. In order to understand this, we first looked at senior age-related organisations that specialise in getting the voice of the elderly heard. Senior Voice is a group that was created in 2008 by funding through the Devon County Council and NHS Devon. They aim to speak out on everything that affects the quality of life of the aged. We interviewed Tim Hall and Ken Crawford from Senior Voice to see what they believed were the main problems that the elderly today face.
Generation, as you get older, particularly your health worries increase, and I think you need to know that I think healthcare is probably that issue will be dealt with properly.
Yeah. Again, it's sort of healthcare has got to be the first one. Transport is then going to be the next one, because if you're going to improve the lives of older people, you've got to let them be able to get out and about, and it's very, very difficult in rural areas. I suppose the third one is an adequate supply of food. What you are having now is that there are a number of people, that, particularly on basic pensions, have got the problem of either heating the house or eating, and a lot of them are putting it into heating rather than eating the problem. And that is a problem.
In order to understand what each local party thinks about the problems the elderly in Devon face, we asked a representative from the Green Party, UKIP and the Liberal Democrats about what their party identifies as the most important problem. Here's what they had to say. Unfortunately, a representative from the Labour and Conservative parties did not have the time to take part in this project.
The elderly in Devon have a lot of the problems that very young people have as well, which is kind of an interesting situation. They principally have problems with transport. This is a major issue. A lot of people living in rural parts of Devon as well will have difficulty getting around. Some of the bus services are being cut. Also, there's healthcare issues, and I suppose the other thing as well is access to information services. Those are probably the key things, and support as well for housing needs as well.
Two issues. The first one is the loss of sovereignty, and when I meet an awful lot of what I would call 70 plus. They are still active, they are still extremely erudite, and they are concerned for their children and their grandchildren, and in some cases their great-grandchildren. And they look back over a period of 60, 70 years, and some of them, their parents were involved in the war, or even they were involved in the war. And they are unhappy about the way this country is going and the way we are going. Secondly, they are concerned about themselves. They want to leave something behind them when they die, and they would like to leave something of value to their children and their grandchildren, particularly to help their grandchildren through education. And they see a government that is actually stripping them of their assets. They see care home prices going up, rocketing, because of legislation which is coming from outside the British Parliament. And they sit down and they work out and they think, well, they're going to end up, if they end up in a care home for a relatively short period of time, it's going to strip them of their assets, and they're concerned about that.
Well, I think probably the problems faced by the elderly are the problems of being part of a rising demographic. There are far more people suffering the problems that are associated with old age, and that means that they're early adopters for every new strategy that needs to be rolled out in order to be, for us as a society, to be able to afford to look after people who are past their economically productive time, and certainly once they get past the age of 80, suddenly very, very expensive.
So it appears that each party identifies different problems as the most important. Does this mean that their policies are tailored to suit different needs?
Well, we've a few things different. The main thing, I suppose, is the importance of free social care, and that it wouldn't depend on the sale of a house. That's one of the most important things that we've got in the policy document. But the other thing as well is what's called the citizen's income, and that's the kind of thing that's going to allow for people of all ages, but in particular old people, to have more control over their lives, their working lives, and their retirements.
Put more finance in it, towards it. We're spending 19 billion a year on foreign aid. We're spending a similar amount as a contribution to the European Union. Now the question is, should we be looking at ways of reducing those figures, or removing them altogether? I mean, my party believes that we should be putting more money into the care for the elderly and developing it in that way.
Well, I don't think overall any party does a great deal of tailoring. I mean, if you actually look at all the parties, they have a lot in common on this. One thing they don't do is cut pensions. And I think policy is actually dictated largely by the fact that people over pension age are disproportionately powerful, massively disproportionately powerful, because they turn out at elections. So in my election recently, in May this year, we had a 28.6% turnout in my county council election in Tiverton, and I would say that probably at least a third, probably half of that electorate were people either around or over retirement age. And therefore I think almost every policy, certainly in terms of asset allocation, is counted in favour actually of older people compared to the interests of other parts of the community. It doesn't mean that older people get all the things that they need, but if you compare that to investment in some of the issues to do with younger people, I think older people do quite well in these austere times.
So, in terms of policy formation, do these parties consult community groups such as Senior Voice to see what problems the elderly face today?
The policies that you've read already that are on our website have been developed by the membership over the years and continue to go through changes and iterations. As a result, often of consultation and experts coming from different fields. Interestingly, you mentioned Devon Voice, because I spoke to them myself recently, and I've brought with me their magazine, which is a newsletter. So Devon Senior Voice are great organisations because they have these networks of people, and they focus on a lot of interesting and important things that maybe we'll talk about a little later on.
Personally, I go round tonight as a lecturer for something called the Unit. I don't know whether you've come across that.
Aye.
No. Now, not so bad. But what it does is it gives lectures on, or individual speakers give lectures on the history of the European Union. And we give to Probus, we give to Round Table, we give to WI, and U3A, and it tends to be groups of elderly. Now, does this element come up? Not in the actual lecture, but it will come up in the chat afterwards, or in the meal that goes with it.
Yeah, a senior voice, but also a lot of advocacy groups, sort of the big ones that spring to mind, Age UK and so on. I mean, all of policy at a national level is worked out really. It's heavily influenced by the major voluntary sector organisations who advocate for older people. In terms of localised policy, it's much more people effectively being part of the process themselves. And we obviously have an older demographic on average here than in the rest of the country. You can see in the makeup of the council itself that the vast majority of councillors here are rounded about retirement age or older. I mean, I find it slightly ludicrous that I joined this council as, I think, there and thereabouts its youngest member at the age of 39 some years ago, and I'm not all that far off the youngest member now at 48. So when I look around, when they were originally talking about setting up the, I can't remember the proper term, it was the Older People's Council arrangements about 5-6 years ago. They were setting up a new arrangement. I found myself at a full county council meeting looking around me, standing up and saying, do we need this parallel organisation when essentially the people in this room are an Older People's Council?
While it is obvious that there are already policies in place that are tailored to help the elderly live a long and indeed a dignified life, there are certainly some gaps and problems that need to be addressed. The current government itself has aimed to correct some of these pressing issues by working to place more funding into public transport and by making trains more accessible. They also aim to allow the elderly to keep working and helping employers take on or keep on older workers with measures such as flexible working. A final gesture that the government is providing for the elderly is aiming to improve the diagnosis of dementia by making £1 million available for innovative NHS projects to increase diagnosis rates. Still, with the population of Britain growing and getting older, literally by the day, these issues are only becoming more and more prominent. So with the future in mind, we had to ask our interviewees what their thoughts were. Is our inevitable old age going to be a blessing or a burden?
I certainly don't want to die yet. I love it.
Yeah, it's
It's
better.
a blessing. As long as you've got your health and you've got enough money to live on.
Yeah.
Once you lose one of those things, it starts to get more of an issue. I don't know anyone who actually wants to, or very few of us want to voluntarily exit this life just yet.
Yeah.
It's an inevitability, I think. And as I see the point of your question, in current society, it feels like a burden. It feels like a burden to people growing old, and that's a real problem.
Growing old healthy is a blessing. When you get sick, it's a burden. For me personally, also for the state personally, I'm very interested in quite rapidly changing social trends in terms of attitudes amongst older people to euthanasia. Because when I talk to people 70 plus, a lot of them are saying, I am absolutely adamant that I don't want to end up like person X, who is frail, elderly and incapable of having any control or any quality of life. Now, these are very difficult questions for society, but I think actually liberalism as a political agenda, which is about people having their own choices and their own opinions about things, and the state telling them what to do as little as possible, is probably particularly relevant to some of those big ethical questions about everything from euthanasia to refusal of treatment to wanting to die at home. All of those sorts of issues are things that are much more talked about in a lot of other societies than England, and which we will need to be talking about in a more serious way now, if only to free people to do what they want to do.
First of all, is it a blessing or a burden on society? We all will age. You know, that's the force of nature. My mother is now 85, and she's living in a lot of pain because her spine is disintegrating. As a result, she is having to see the doctor numerous occasions. She has now become a friend for the doctor. Is her mind clear? Absolutely. She is as bright as a button. Physically, she has to go down, and she's sick. Is she a burden to our society? I don't think so. I think she has an enormous amount to contribute to our society. She wants to be involved, she wants to do things, she doesn't want to go into a home, she wants to remain in her own home. She is a member of the WI, she wants to assist within the community that she lives. So, burden? Yes, she's a burden to the national health. Burden to society? Absolutely not.